Hi, my name is Ainsley Battles. Thank you for joining us this week for Joccupation. Today we'll be discussing charity. We're here with Courtney again. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We're talking about giving back. We're talking about giving, just either giving time, giving information, or giving of your finances. So when we in our heads kind of think of giving and taking, right? A lot of times we think of those as two separate activities. But when we think of charity, can you help us better understand how can I actually get by giving?
Sure. Great question. The act of giving and receiving actually aren't two different things. It's unity. It's one circle, and one bleeds into the other, bleeds into the other, bleeds into the other. So sometimes it's very hard to tell where one stops and one starts. The very act of giving of ourselves, giving of our gifts in some capacity, we receive organically bonds, relationships. We receive a sense of purpose and community. We receive an opportunity to use all of our life's history, all of the knowledge we've gained through all of our hardships and our victories to help empower and lift up others.
When does that, when I say when does that happen, it sounds great. Just like when I tell people, you know, when I got injured, because that's how my career ended, I got injured and had to figure out what to do next. Yes, I got into teaching, right? So I said that not without you really understanding what the 2 years were like, right? So kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit, how could somebody arrive at that space of understanding the circle? Actually, it's the oneness of I'm giving and receiving, but they go hand in hand.
They do go hand in hand. I think you would arrive, I think one would arrive at the space of understanding that you're really dealing with two things complicit with each other when we stop looking at them as cause and effect. When we stop looking at how one affects the other, but rather how congruent they actually are. The 2 years must have been lonely. The 2 years must have been very disorienting. The 2 years must have been confusing. What do I do? How do I plug in? Where do I go? Right? But I would also argue that when you did receive some clarity and when you continued to live out your purpose, the wealth of information that came behind you, the wealth of experience that you had on the field your whole life, we've known each other a very long time, right? Since we were kids. You have a wealth of information behind you to help inform that next chapter. What would you say that you got back from that next chapter of your life? What did you receive from that next chapter?
Perspective.
Perspective. Relationship?
Because now being a father, having kids and kind of understanding my parents are people.
Weird, right?
Right.
I know.
Right, and that's the perspective I got. Because when I'm thinking of charity, when I got into teaching, my aha moment was realizing these 42 kids in the class, or at least half of the boys at least, they would trade their best days on earth for my worst day.
That's right. That's right.
So no matter what my up and down was, I struggled through something very few will ever get to. Because people are like, oh, you're a former player. It's like, well, you had to first sign a contract to get fired. So you did sign that contract. So I found when I was teaching, I'm able to see and give to others.
That's right.
And it wasn't just the athletes in the class. It was the awkward kid. It was the kid who loves drawing, but in public schooling, there's no real space for that. The artist that can take a history lesson and create a song out of it.
Yes.
It's an incredible, but we're in environments where we want to fit in. We want
right.
to, so when we think of the give and take type of relationship, we're kind of binary.
That's right. And when that binary viewpoint is discarded and instead it's much more congruent, it's much more, almost becomes liquid, it's fluid, right? It moves in and out, and it's really hard to tell when it stops and when it starts, because the very act of giving, the very act of plugging into something bigger than yourself naturally reciprocates back to you. It's inevitable. It happens. It's a law of physics, right? So as that moves, as spiritually, emotionally, as that kind of moves around for people, I hear and I experience often feeling better than I did before I gave.
So the good side of charity, of giving, regardless if it's time, finances, or knowledge, there is a bond. There is that connection. But it does take, like we said earlier, that leap. You've got to leave the house. You've got to reach out and step out. So let's talk a second about the opposite, because it is comfortable, and especially if you make enough, you can create your reality.
So true.
And I can have a huge house and invite everybody over and make my world look good, even though I'm not. So for those that don't have that confidence, that want to stay in that space, what are the long-term effects? Help them kind of see a year or two from now, if this is perpetuated, what will they be looking at later?
I love that you asked that question. So as extravagant as some folks are or as some folks create their worlds to be, right? It's very much presentation, right? But it's very isolative in nature. It's very lonely. You're only exposing yourself to only a few different people. You don't have, to use your word, a lot of perspective on the bigger picture, right? So as human animals, when we isolate, when we are alone, we get very, very sick. Isolation and loneliness naturally breed depression and anxiety. We are pack animals, right? We need tribe. And when we don't have that, we get ill. We get very physically and mentally ill. And all of that illness then has to be managed. It's got to be managed with alcohol. It's got to be managed with drugs. You see it with kids now. It's managed with video games. It's anything that can soothe that pain. But when we take a step back out of the pain and say, where's that coming from? You're isolated. You're all alone. And you're not meant to be all alone. You're meant to give. You're meant to be a part of something bigger than yourself. So when we, out of fear or anger or whatever it is, kind of isolate and hole up, we get very, very sick every time. It's not avoidable.
So what's a practical step somebody could take? They know they haven't left the house,
right,
and they blame COVID all they want to,
right,
but they know they didn't leave the house before COVID.
You got it.
What is because I think part of that too is there is that fear. There is a fear. What's something that somebody could do in the moment to either overcome the fear or at least be able to see their fear?
Absolutely. Well, I think the longer a person has been isolating, the more socially anxious they become at the thought of leaving the house, at the thought of giving back, at the thought of connecting to others. They become very comfortable, as we had talked about before, in their own kind of misery, in their own little situation. I would recommend starting very, very small. Set up weekly phone calls, weekly Zoom sessions, have a friend come over every week, but have it as a standing date. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m., this is who I'm connecting with. And make sure that you let the person on the other end know, hey, they need to keep me accountable. I need you to help me. I will see you next week. Make sure you call. And if I don't answer, you call again. That kind of thing, right? And so start kind of small. Start very small. Stick with people who feel safe to you, even if it's just one or two people. Totally okay. And then when you do start to kind of reemerge into society, go with them. And it can be short amounts of time. I do recommend setting time boundaries as to when you start to kind of start to connect and get back integrated. Go for an hour. Don't leave the house open-ended. Say, I don't know when I'm going to come back. It'll feel too overwhelming. Say, I'm going to leave my house. I have 60 minutes. I will be back here and say, I can do anything for 60 minutes. So start small. It's small little tweaks create big change and big ripple effects.
That's perfect. So in closing, with charity, is there any advice? Is there anything that you feel, is there any advice that you think could help somebody kind of take the whole conversation, kind of get down to maybe one or two points that they can pull away?
Absolutely. The biggest point of this entire conversation is you are not alone, and you are not in this alone. And even though it feels like everything that you are struggling with and everything that you are thinking about and all the burden that's on your shoulders is only on your shoulders, it's not. And you do not have to carry that by yourself. All you have to do is reach out. All you have to do is speak up. You are a part of a greater good. You are part of a bigger community. You are part of a natural reciprocity of giving and receiving. Let us give back to you. You don't have to do it by yourself.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We look forward to you tuning in next week when we will share with you what our topic will be. And now, your weekly motivational speech.